Hi, Rabble.
Hey, Alice.
We're here in Austin at South by Southwest.
Absolutely.
And you just came off stage with Bridget Todd and Rudy Fraser. Bridget's been on a podcast, so has Rudy. What were you guys talking about on stage?
Yeah, so we wanted to get together and have a conversation about what should we be advocating for creators? What should we be advocating in social media? And we talked about the way in which podcasting acts as this route, for example, of how open protocols, open social could exist. And then Rudy and I talked about the experience of Blacksky and the experience of Divine as these new open social ecosystems and these apps, and how do we create a sustainable ecosystem for the users, and what is democratic control, and how do creators maintain a relationship with their audience as opposed to simply gaming the algorithm.
Yeah, and I love that podcast analogy because everyone understands that no one owns a podcast except for the creator. Like no one owns our podcast except for us. And if someone doesn't want to put it on their platform, we'll still be on many other platforms.
Yeah.
And that when you build, a Blacksky or a Divine, it's the same principle that if we decide for some reason that content shouldn't live on the Divine servers, it can still live in other places on the internet. So I think it's a really great conversation. It's audio only. And so I encourage everyone to pull up their favorite podcast app and take a listen.
Absolutely.
It's funny, we proposed this panel, feels like forever ago, and so much on the internet has changed and grown since then. But I'm so excited to have this conversation with Rudy and Bridget to talk about where we're going with social media, where we're going with the internet, and the real importance for users and creators of these things to build platforms that you can control and that we can control these relationships. And so just to introduce myself, I am Rabble. I have been around building social media apps and platforms for a really long time. I was part of the original Odeo team that created Twitter. And back in November, I launched an app called Divine, which is sort of relaunching Vine and brings back all the old Vines as an open source, open protocol. And I would love you guys to just introduce yourselves and tell your own story about where you're at, and then we can start the conversation about what we should be doing in the creator economy and what we should be building.
So I'm Rudy. I'm the founder of Blacksky Algorithms. We build online spaces where users can control the discovery algorithms, the content moderation, and can scale those communities to millions of users. It's built on the authenticated transfer protocol. So if you ever heard of Bluesky, we interoperate with Bluesky. Bluesky is like Gmail, where like Outlook is like a good analogy. So if you are on Bluesky, you can message users on Blacksky and vice versa. You can also move your data around. And the kind of idea with Blacksky is that it's like Black Twitter, but if the users own their identities and Black Twitter itself owned its space in its corner of Twitter and was able to kind of make its own decisions democratically. And so, the Blacksky feed has been used by 2.5 million folks. We get 250,000 monthly active users across the feeds. And we've since built our full independent stack, independent from Bluesky. What that means is all the 43 million accounts that are on Bluesky, if Bluesky were to disappear tomorrow, all those folks could just use Blacksky as if nothing ever happened. And we've been able to do that as a bootstrapped kind of grassroots organization. We started out, everything we build is open source. It started out being kind of fiscally hosted by an open source nonprofit. And around last year, we turned it into a company. So that's Blacksky in a nutshell. Yeah.
Hey y'all, I'm Bridget Todd. I am a super fan of both Divine and Blacksky, so I'm really excited to be here with both of you. I'm a tech podcaster. I host iHeartRadio's award-winning tech podcast, There Are No Girls on the Internet, that kind of examines the intersection of identity, technology, and social media. I'm also an affiliate at Harvard University's Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society, where I focus on podcasts, what makes them work, what makes them not work, what are some ways that podcasting as an industry is really winning for folks, and what are some of the downfalls of the space right now? I'm kind of interested in the way that harmful, inaccurate, or inflammatory information can travel in the podcast space so quickly. If you've ever looked at what the top podcasts are. Some of the content there, you might be like, I'm not so sure about that. But I'm also really interested in why some of the things that make podcasting as a medium such a unique vector for that kind of thing also makes it a medium that is so intimate and warm and that can really be poised to combat some of the more harmful stuff that we see in the space. So spend a lot of time thinking about podcasts and why I think it is the OG decentralized network.
That's such a good point. Like the podcast itself is the example of social media that isn't controlled by a single platform where you can choose how do you post it, you can choose who your ads are, you can choose how you distribute it and everything else. And it's ironic that it's one of the earlier social media sort of mediums. And then we got this sort of centralized mess that's driven by algorithms where you don't have a say. You don't have the community governance that you built with Blacksky.
Yeah. So one of the ways that we kind of like explain the differences with Blacksky is that we're about to release so App Protocol, it's around public conversations, like you make a post and it goes out to the whole internet, right? You have no control over who has access to that. That's fine in a lot of cases, but what we found with Blacksky is there's moments actually where we kind of want to have it be like more of a private subreddit. You want to be able to, I think of it as like modulating your speech, right? In this very moment, I'm speaking to all of you in this room, projecting my voice, but if you're in the conference halls, right, you may have a bunch of people around you, but you could talk to just like one person and they just hear you, or you could talk to a group. So that's kind of what we're trying to create with Blacksky. And then once you do that, we're like, okay, y'all upload 100,000 images and videos every month. So how do we as a small team moderate that content? And so in a normal startup or company, you would just do a top-down decision and be like, we're just going to do AI-based moderation. And AI is very controversial right now. I know maybe not in South by Southwest. There's lots of AI topics, but with our community, it is controversial. There are real harms that Black communities have faced around the proliferation of AI on these data centers. And so our community is very sensitive about things like that. Because we're on a decentralized protocol, the users have a lot more agency. They could just leave us. We are supported by our members, not advertisers. So people give around $6,000 a month in contributions to us. They could just turn off their subscription. We built the tools to actually have people migrate their accounts. We had thousands of people leave Blue Sky to join Blacksky, keep all their followers. They could do that in the opposite direction, right? So we can't just impose things on them. So the protocol also kind of enforces these democratic ideals, and then we built the tools to allow our community to be like, 1,000 folks are able to participate in this conversation, from everyday users to like Timnit Gebru, who's like a whistleblower at Google and is an expert and is able to like weigh in and say, here's how machine learning actually works. And you can have this like democratic process. And so instead of us just deciding how content is moderated, the community decided that together.
And it's kind of crazy that this idea of democracy and deciding democracy over the spaces in which we occupy and how we make social media feels like this sort of radical idea. But in other contexts, the idea that we should make the rules by which we live isn't, or even see the rules, because you don't see the content rules on these platforms at all. And Bridget, you were talking about the way in which we see this in podcasting. At the end of every podcast, how people call out to build their audience.
Yeah, so if you've ever listened to a podcast, at the end, you probably hear the host say something along the lines of, subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast. Who's heard that, right? And so to me, that is actually meaningful. It really means something kind of radical, because that's not just something that people say. It is true because of the way that podcasts are built by RSS feeds that are not proprietary. Nobody owns them. You really can find that content wherever you get your podcast. And so I think that one of the reasons why podcasting to me is such an exciting medium is because it is democratized in that way, right? Like if I say something that Apple doesn't like, Apple can't shut down my podcast because it doesn't work that way, thanks to the RSS feed. And so I think there are a lot of takeaways for how we could be thinking about decentralized networks going forward that are baked into this like old school medium of podcasting that's been around for decades.
Yeah, one of the fascinating things was I was around as part of the early creation of podcasting and remember the debates about the protocols. And at one point, some of the podcast platforms started downloading and then resharing. They would host your podcast, and they would host the MP3s and MP4s. And what that meant was that the podcasters themselves, they couldn't insert ads. Like, the ad insertion didn't work at that point, but they were hoping that it would exist, and they couldn't get any analytics about who was listening to what. And these early podcasters actually had a kind of strike where they refused to let these hosters who were going to be this intermediary have their content. And it was very early on, so it wasn't very many people, but the creators basically formed a syndicate, formed a kind of union of podcast creators and said, no, we won't let you take this over. And the weird part is, in the rest of social media, and in the case of Twitter, which, Blue Sky is and then Blacksky sort of derived from, the users, when there was that enclosure, didn't win that fight. And so we ended up with these centralized platforms.
And I feel like you compare podcasting to YouTube, TikTok, all of these other platforms where not only do you have so much less control as a creator, you don't even get transparency into how decisions are made, right? Like, I've encountered moderation decisions on these platforms where I don't even have the visibility into what happened there. And so that level of control and ownership, not just of what you're doing, but also how you engage with your audience, I think is just baked into podcasting from its earliest days.
Yeah, and the fascinating thing is, for the algorithms, people use algorithms to build an audience. They build demand and everything else. And the very first thing you built with Blacksky was your own algorithm, because Blue Sky had this idea, you bring your own algorithm. Can you talk about how you decided your algorithm would be different?
Yeah, so before Blacksky, I was kind of in the Web3 world. That's kind of how I heard about Blue Sky and everything. And to me, the promise of algorithmic choice, to be able to have control of what I see on the internet, was really cool to me as a curational tool. I always tell people I have 2 YouTube accounts. One that I watch drill rap music videos on, and another that I watch tech journalism on. Because the algorithm can't understand that people contain multitudes, and you have these different moods and vibes that you have that you want to tap into. And so the recommender algorithms can't show you these things. And then, anytime I could open up Instagram, TikTok, any of these apps right now, and it's going to show me Black content. And so people, there's this funny behavior when every time we have a big migration to Blacksky, people are let me post all these terms to make the algorithm know that I'm Black. And it's that's what people are used to. And so the pitch is really aren't you tired of trying to goad the algorithm into showing you the things that you want to see? The idea that I could just make something that shows, I just want to see Black content. I want to see Black people happy. I want to see, that's what I want to see when I open my phone. And to me, I saw from the very early days, was if this works, YouTube would adopt it. It was never about Twitter and competing with Twitter. It was about the idea and the underlying protocol. And if all these ideas went to all these different places, I could control my TikTok algorithm. I could control what I see on Instagram. I could be on Instagram and talk to someone on Twitter. There wouldn't be a walled garden with that. If, Instagram just announced that they're ending end-to-end encrypted DMs, what if I could log into Signal with my Instagram account? That's what you can do today with your app protocol account. Someone made an end-to-end encrypted tool called Germ that allows for that. So being able to I was at the very early days, I was seeing where it would go, and I was oh. And then what happened is that Blacksky became a communal space for Black folks. It became something that people identified with. They started calling themselves Blacksky as a community. And then the community really is what built it up. I always tell people I never did paid promotion. I never asked to do an interview. I never reached out to people. The users themselves made Blacksky what it is, they came up with their own trends, their own terms, their own, their own lingo, calling it the skyline instead of the timeline. That all came from just the Black users making it their own thing. But this time, there's someone they could go to. There was a team they could go to, and I would tell them we're just the hands on the keyboard. We want to make this space for you. And yeah, and so now we have a few different algorithms. We have one called the Black Academics feed. That's one that's speaking of creators, I kind of think of this Professor Gray from CUNY. he wanted like a subsection of Blacksky to just see the black professors, the black academics, folks who study blackness. So we created like a Black academics feed. We have the main Blacksky feed, which is still just like everybody. It's the whole, it's the big party. It's reverse chronological. And then there's Blacksky trending now, which is like, we can design the trending algorithm. So like, and all the code is open source, so people understand how it works, right? But we can say, we know, instead of like going off of likes, we actually know that our community on Blacksky quote posts a lot of things as a way to like engage with things. So they may not like it, but they'll quote post it. And in other parts, like on Blue Sky, that may be seen as a way of dunking on someone. That's a negative thing. But actually, that's just a way for someone to add to the conversation and joke. So that's something we score that higher than like a like. And then sometimes people may be popular outside of Blacksky. You may be a black creator, but then you have like a largely white audience. We score likes from the Blacksky community higher than a like from like someone outside the community. So we're able to like get really granular. And then, safety is built into the system. So like Blacksky is opt-in, but you can't just opt in and like use a slur, use the hard R. Like we have protection mechanisms in there built in too to like remove that content or downplay things that we would think would be harmful to the community.
I actually have a question for both of you, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Talking about this, you don't have to sell me on all of the benefits of decentralization. I think that's where the internet is headed. For someone who is not sort of mired in all of this, like how do you make the point for why any of this matters, right? Like I see the incredible benefit of what decentralized networks like Blacksky offer. When I'm in conversation with my little cousin and they're like, why do I care about this? I sometimes feel like I don't have the language to sell it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So when I announced Divine and the sort of Vine relaunch, the only way it could happen is as an open protocol, as an open source thing. Because if we were to go and say, oh, hey, I've gone off in the Internet Archive and I found all this old content and I've taken it and made it mine and now I'm reserving it again, then there's a lot of copyright issues or all sorts of things like that. We had to be open in this way and provide, the algorithmic choice and the moderation stuff and all, it's a different protocol than what Blacksky uses, but it's very similar. But what we actually told people, and we told them all of that stuff, but no one cared. They cared about something much simpler. Like they cared about two things. They cared about you're bringing vines back and you're filtering out AI slop. And so I have a suspicion that when people see Blacksky as an example or any of these other things, that they're hearing a much simpler story. For us, it was just like we made all these fun, playful, joyful videos back in an era of everything else, and like I couldn't get to them. I suspect for Blacksky, it's just like buying for your community. And they don't know all of the technical details of the massive infrastructure behind it.
Yeah, I think I'll say it's a challenge. It's like the biggest barrier to the adoption of decentralized protocols and apps is that like, I think it's just like not a paradigm that like people are used to interacting with. Cause black folks like totally get the like need for like black owned spaces. Like that's never needed to be explained. Like Jet magazine or like anything like any kind of like curational platforms. But what we try to explain to people is that like, it's not like that because we're not trying to like recreate a centralized platform where I don't want to be, I tell it with my team as well. I don't want to be anyone's boss. I don't want to be the HNIC, like in this situation. You feel me? Like I want us to communally own a platform. We're building the things that make that more obvious for people to understand. Like we had being able to moderate anti-black content. That was something that, this is something new. Having an algorithm, having a feed. That's something new. Being able to design new experiences, I think that's the thing that like will create like an unlock for people. Like you can log in with this same account into multiple different places. Another thing that we're building is like Blacksky Cash, like a fintech product that like weaves in, someone called it like Venmo for anarchists, right? Like being able to like weave in your social graph and this kind of like web of trust, your relationships, right? Like into a payment system is something that just like, I think we're very early on, and like as new products get built that demonstrate the benefits of it, because we can't, what I think doesn't work is like using fear as a way to like drive it. Like there's some people who
it has
like,
to be hope. You have to be excited about something. You don't, instead of just running away from something.
Yeah, like you can't pitch people on this is billionaire proof. Like some people are just like, because people will respond to that honestly is like, well, if this app goes down, we'll just go to group chats, like that's the sentiment that people have. People are kind of burnt out of these different apps. So I think you need to have new ways to like excite them and delight them.
I know a bit about this just from us having a conversation about it, but for both of you, I think there is a temptation to tell the story in the way that you just described. We're running away from something.
Yeah.
There's a bad guy, and then we're the good guys creating something good. I understand.
Trust us more. Like, we won't fuck up like they did.
Yeah, trust us. How do you, even though that is a useful storytelling framing, perhaps, how do you shy away from that and tell a truer story?
There's this funny thing. So the IETF, which is the standards body that made the internet, and it's all these nerds, and they have this unofficial motto, which is like, we reject kings, presidents, and voting. We believe in rough consensus and running code. And that's what gave us the web we have today. It's what made it work. And so we should build things like that. But like in my podcast, Revolution.social, I've talked to a bunch of these sort of founders and people who shape social media platforms, and it all comes back to incentives. You have all these ideas, all these good ideas about how we're going to build it, and we're going to be the free speech thing, and we're going to cultivate community and everything else. And then you have economic incentives. You have advertisers, you have servers, you have bills to pay, you have investors. And so the podcasting world stayed open because it discovered an advertising model that kept the podcaster in control. And so that's why the Blacksky Cash stuff is so interesting to me, and why I've been trying to help in building it and talking about it, is because it gives you an economic model that is based on what your community already has done, but translates it into a digital space.
Yeah, because like there's already people who do fundraisers. There's Blue Sky's kind of actually been well known in these the ICE protests, for example. Like people raised millions of dollars like using the platform, and being able to have that be like in a way that can't be cut off from people. And for Blacksky Cash in particular, like we want to reach folks that maybe are the culture builders on platforms, sex workers, like black folks, like people who maybe are on the margins and traditional platforms just won't work for them. Maybe they suppress their content. There's all these things that people do on like TikTok, or things people say so that their content doesn't get taken down. And if you are deplatformed, like what recourse do you have, right? So being able to give folks these choices and being able to provide a way for them to make this their home and be able to preserve, even if you dislike one provider, you can move somewhere else and not lose your followers, like not lose the audience that you've built. I think tying all that together, like I do think the monetization piece, being able to like tip creators on the platform, stuff like that, is like one of the like final pieces for folks.
Because, in some ways, it's that advertising model, especially on the big platforms and the credit card processing and a bunch of things like that, that lead to the moderation rules, that lead to the censorship, that lead to why some content gets massively downloaded, decides what is political. Mm-hmm. Like Meta has all this idea of political stuff, and it's like, well, political is what advertisers and financial interests don't like. And it's like a really big deal. And when Web 2.0 started, we had this idea that you weren't an influencer, you weren't a creator, everything else. You were a community builder. And, we were having this conversation earlier of like, what's a creator and what's an influencer, or what's an organizer? And this idea that you're not producing content, you are organizing a community together is so fascinating. Bridget, a lot of your work is, you're producing content and everything else, but you're organizing a community.
I think of it that way. I sometimes oscillate between a content creator and a community builder, but my audience, it's small but mighty, but it's people who care about building a better internet. It's people who care about things like decentralization, and being able to have a little bit more control over that audience than I maybe would on a platform like Twitter. Initially, before Elon Musk bought Twitter, that was my main platform. It was where I spent far too much energy and time building up my little community. And then Elon Musk bought it. And then one day I was like, you know what? Fuck this. I cannot show up here anymore. And so that really taught me the importance of, if you're going to be in these spaces where building a community and like genuinely engaging with that community is important, have a little bit more ownership over it. Have a little bit more control over it. Don't have it be a space that like one person can nuke overnight.
Yeah, I mean, and that was the big debate after Elon took over Twitter, is there were all these people who showed up as saviors, including Zuckerberg, who was like, here, come to mine. I've done such a good job with all of my other social platforms, you should trust Threads. And the fascinating thing is that first wave of solutions, they're mostly gone now. Mm-hmm. And the ones that have survived in a bigger way, and Blue Sky in particular, wasn't based on that idea of trusting who is in charge. And, just recently, she stepped down as CEO of Blue Sky. She didn't leave. But it doesn't have the same impact on, for example, Blacksky or even the Blue Sky community than it would if it were a traditionally centralized platform. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just sort of that process and the way in which it isn't as important as people maybe think.
Yeah, I think there's a world where the announcement of Blue Sky having a new CEO would... So when I kind of started out building Blacksky, there was all this stuff where if we tried to like raise money from folks, they would be like, why isn't this like TweetDeck? Like why isn't this just like another app? And if Twitter cuts off or Blue Sky cuts off its API, your whole business falls apart. And it really was because that's just not how it's structured over here. Like Blue Sky could act like we don't exist. Blue Sky they can make it so the Blacksky feed doesn't show on their app. But like users would know where to go to like find us. Like our audience still has we still have that direct relationship with our audience. And when I think about the decentralization piece too, like I do think about I think about one of the interesting things, and I'll come back to Tony, because it's the thing with Tony and them is that like, that's the new Blue Sky CEO. He's also a venture capitalist of an AI first, AI native founder kind of VC firm. So you would think, especially with the type of users that are on Blue Sky, that would be like red flags for them, right? Like, it's gonna be like, oh, they're about to just sell all our data, and that was the initial reaction that people had. But then even with Blacksky, they crack jokes about that, but then they're like, oh, we're going to be good. There was still this kind of even though this is happening, we're going to be good. Maybe other people got to figure themselves out, but we'll be good. And yeah, I just think about that, being able to have that direct relationship with your audience and being able to use multiple of these protocols. So something we recently did was we hooked up the Blacksky website. Our Blacksky website is on WordPress. WordPress integrates with the Fediverse, which is another set of decentralized protocols. So when we publish blog posts telling our story, telling our narrative, right? Because that's very important for us. I feel like I sympathize and empathize with creators a lot, and I think of myself like a creator because I've had to build a business where people's impression of me and my story is a piece of what brings them in. The story of Blacksky, the narrative we tell. And journalists, have not always covered our stories in ways that I find totally accurate. And so we've always, from the very beginning, I would just like I was never on Twitter, I never blogged before Blacksky for real. But it was just because, all right, if y'all aren't going to tell our story, I'll document it myself. And as we got bigger, it was just like, well, I don't need Wired or TechCrunch to tell people what we got going on. They already follow me. We'll do a long form blog post. And what the WordPress integration with the Fediverse does is there's a whole other side of the internet that is interested in my work that I go back and forth with sometimes because I'm like, you don't always choose like Vince Staples said on the interview once, tortured artists, you don't always choose your fans. But, no shade to the Fediverse folks. But so we publish, we publish stuff over there now too.
Sounds like yes, shade a little bit.
Yeah.
just a little bit.
The funny thing is so there's all these protocols. There's ActivityPub and there's App Protocol and there's Nostr and there's a bunch of others too. And the funniest thing is the users seem to have so much beef between each other and everything else, but the developers building this stuff don't so much. The developers building all these things, they're like, oh, there's a lot of similarities. We're building this larger ecosystem. So you're publishing to the Fediverse.
Yeah.
And let them follow it so they can know what's going on in Blacksky.
Because it's additive, right? It's just because there are black folks on the Fediverse, and so we want them to hear our story too. Maybe it inspires them, maybe it gives them a little bit of information. So we published to the Fediverse, and then another person built a tool that hooks the WordPress up back to app protocol. So now we do our blog posts in one place and it's fanned out to these other different social media protocols where people can interact with it and comment and reply. So very much like podcasts. And so being able to do stuff like that, we're able to like weave in the replies to our posts in to be shown on like web pages. Just having all that control means we have one platform isn't mediating the relationship between us and our user base.
You know what's really funny is at the same time that podcasting was coming out, we used RSS, which is the protocol behind podcast, for all sorts of other things. It was a whole era of mashups. I remember it was the hot thing at South by 20 years ago, where people were launching mashups all the time, and there was Mashable, which is a whole startup for mashups, and the idea that you could take all this stuff back and forth. And podcasting, one sort of subset of that, stuck around. But we just didn't build the rest of the user experience in a good enough way for the other parts of it. And I think we trusted platforms more. So ActivityPub, the Mastodon protocol, was based on this thing called activity streams and like this thing called open social. And Facebook supported it. Like Facebook funded a bunch of this development. They actually were part of it in 2006 and 2007. And then they supported this open thing until they had captured enough of the space and they could be like, oh no, we're shutting it down. And you saw even big companies like Zynga with Farmville and things like that. They built multi-billion-dollar companies. And then Facebook's like, no, we don't want to do that anymore. And the rug was sort of pulled out from under them. The thing with the new things, these new protocols, is they're designed so that we don't have to trust those big platforms anymore. And maybe we can do like the early podcasters did, where if someone goes and puts themselves in that position of power, you block them and everything else. So like Blue Sky has done none of this. Blue Sky has been very well behaved with its interactions with Blacksky and the others. But if at some point they did start creating a way in which they were locking it down, that would be a moment in which it would be really important for everybody who believed in the open ecosystem to engage in a strike. And a strike, we've seen digital strikes. We saw Reddit mods do it. And because they had no way they had no say. They had no control of their own tech. They had no control over the servers. They had no control over their identities. They had no way of exit. Reddit was able to put down this community organizing effort by Reddit mods who didn't like what Reddit was going to do with blocking third-party apps and selling all their content to AI companies.
Pretty sure they replaced some mods too.
Yeah, they replaced a bunch of them. Yeah.
And I think in a time where people are really burnt out on platforms, and I think big tech in general, there's so much to be depressed and sad about when it comes to our internet ecosystem. But this is something that brings me genuine hope. That people are like, I'm not getting burned again. I'm not trusting platforms again. I'm going to build spaces and networks where we do have more control, where it's not one person can't just change everything. And if they do, that's fine. We'll be over here. We'll be good. That's the thing that really makes me feel hopeful about where we're going when it comes to our internet landscape.
Yeah, and Rudy doesn't talk about this so much, but Blacksky is not just a copy of the Blue Sky open source. You didn't just take the GitHub repositories and do a search and replace for blue for black and then repost it up on servers. It would have sort of worked. But what you did, this is so much more impressive, is you rebuilt all the software independently and redesigned it in a compatible way. And that is also part of what gives these platform alternatives real staying power, because you're not dependent on the software development efforts of the Blue Sky company.
Yeah, because I think, I was in Taylor Lorenz's session the other day, and she was saying that people crave community. I believe that. I agree with that. And so I think it puts you in a really bad situation if you're a content creator, you're a community manager, if you have to rely on other people who are not going to address your community, like Black users. I think there's a bunch of stuff where folks talk about how Black users create all the value for these platforms but are not necessarily protected. There are so many situations where black folks have been being a black person with a large following on the internet. It makes you extraordinarily visible and puts you under a lot of scrutiny. And so I always tell folks, like, Blacksky's been battle tested. Like, I've been like doxxed by white supremacists. Like, we've had like trolls try to like raid the platform. But because we built everything from scratch, every time I obviously knew what was going to happen. And so whenever it happened, it was like, okay, let's roll out this feature. Let's make it so that we have a ban from TV feature where you can't even view the feed now. And like, we have a shared block list. We have all these shared moderation tools that are protected. So it's really like we designed it from first principles, like from the needs of the users that we have. Even today, like I posted, I was like, you know, it's really as simple as you have a direct relationship with us. So you could be a Blacksky user who goes and like asks Blue Sky for features and they ignore you. Or you could support our work and we'll build stuff specifically for you. And if you don't think that matters, you can love us from a distance. Like, because like that really is, that's the whole purpose of all this, is to be able to like have a space where we communally have say over how it gets developed. And not just like a small internet forum. Like, we want to reach millions and billions of people. And so that's what's really important for us, yeah.
Yeah, I gotta say, as a black woman who's been on the internet for a long time, I know exactly what you're talking about. And I think when you were just describing some of the thoughtful ways that Blacksky comes at content moderation, it just really holds up how little other platforms, how little thought and care and intention went into content moderation on other platforms. I know that it's often, I guess I'll say, a unique challenge to moderate content on a platform like Blacksky, where you have so many intra-communities. And so there are probably things happening on Blacksky where you're like, the way to handle this is that this community needs to talk it out themselves, and then they will, like, it's not up to me to step in and make some moderation decision. It underscores the importance of having cultural, competent folks who have been thinking thoughtfully about content moderation from the very beginning, as opposed to rushing in as an afterthought when something bad happens, which I feel like is the standard of care that we get on so many other social media platforms.
Yeah, I remember with the BAFTAs controversy recently, there was, in the response to that, there was like stuff online where folks were like talking about, obviously a slur was said, so even just talking around that topic gets really challenging. There's like intersections between anti-black racism and ableism, and like, people ignoring the fact that there are disabled black folks, and there's nuance. And so nuance is a thing that big platforms also don't do well. I would like to see more in the app protocol ecosystem around this kind of stuff, because like, in response to that, I remember one of the actresses from Sinners was responding about how like the BAFTAs and the BBC just showed a lack of care for like, what they censored and then what they allowed to be aired. And I think that's what I think of with a lot of the big platforms. There's just a lack of care. And we see that with like Facebook had, this remit to have 4 billion users, and so
there's scale. The scale becomes a major problem.
And if you're trying to get to 4 billion users, you may not care about the specific moderation situations and the language that you need to moderate in like Myanmar. So that's how a literal like genocide happens. Like sometimes people are like, social media is not such a big deal. It's not this like big social problem, because no one's going to die over it, but like people have. Like there's like real harm that can happen because of online spaces. And we see this with radicalization, polarization. But if you believe that the people closest to the problem are the ones who can solve it, then they should have the tools to be able to solve it themselves, right? So and this is where there's like maybe some good AI, because we can like work with someone like Timnit, who's like familiar with like her team at DARE, the Distributed AI Research Institute. Like they do a lot of work of like being able to like apply moderation to different languages, because all languages
they're not interchangeable.
Yeah, exactly. And you need like specific context for those situations. So I think being able to like have the tools that allow you to address these like what may not be worth it for a big platform to address, but you as a part of a community can address, I think that's like really good.
Mike Masnick is this journalist, and he wrote one essay, which is Protocols, Not Platforms, an Algorithmic Approach to Free Speech. And that was part of what inspired the creation of Blue Sky and a bunch of protocols. He also wrote this thing called his impossibility theorem, which was content moderation is impossible at scale because you lose the context, because you lose the connection to community. And, now there's this debate, can we reappropriate, can we use AI to do this? But I think it's really important to think about what is sustainability, what is scale, what do we want these things to be? Something that inspires me is the sort of disability rights movement phrase of nothing about us without us. Mm-hmm. And that makes so much sense. It makes so much sense in the world of AI. It makes so much sense in the world of social media when we think about these systems that we're designing. And right after Elon Musk bought Twitter, I was weirdly invited to this Black Twitter summit, which was quite controversial on the internet for a while. And they were like, who's the white guy with the weird dyed hair in this thing? And mostly I was there to listen and talk about some of the protocols and stuff and what you could do. And a huge amount of the day, there was all these amazing Black intellectuals and people with huge audiences, and Twitter was really important to them. And there was a lot of discussion that before we could get to what to do, there was a lot of processing about how poorly Black Twitter had been treated by Twitter. And now you look back and you see how awful Elon is about it, and but at this point, we didn't even get to the disaster of what Elon was starting to do to realize that the reality that had existed before Elon bought it was not good. It was like a space had been opened up, and not just Black Twitter, but like many different spaces had been opened up on these platforms, but they were not having a responsive trust and safety team, even if they tried, because there wasn't the budget for it. There wasn't the community accountability. And the end of that session, as one developer stood up and said, stop looking for a savior, build your own thing. You've got to stop looking for some other VC-funded company that's going to come along where you can trust them to do the right things despite the incentives. And I think that at the time, we didn't have alternatives that worked. Blue Sky hadn't launched. Nostr, which I built Divine on, didn't work. Like, it existed but didn't work. And the inspiring thing is not that we lost these big platforms or they've gone to the right. The inspiring thing is we're starting to build things beyond podcasting that are community controlled.
I get so frustrated because nobody hates Elon Musk more than me, well, maybe some people do, but,
yeah.
When I talk about the early days of Twitter, oftentimes it feels like I'm being nostalgic for something. And I was there. I was there during Gamergate. I was there during End Father's Day. I was there for some times that actually weren't so good, right? Uh-huh. And it's very tempting to look back and say, oh, the good old days. And it's were they really good old days? And I think that underscores just a frustration that I have with this dynamic where it feels like, and particularly for anybody who's marginalized online, Black folks, Black and brown creators, the people who, sex workers, trans folks, queer folks, the people who make the internet worth showing up for, it's almost like this dynamic that feels like a sharecropping system where we show up, the conditions are horrible, and there's no expectation that the people who are running things are going to care about you. They don't care if you get threatened, they don't care if you get doxxed, they do not care, and that you're just meant to show up and create profit and data that the people who run these platforms just feel entitled to harvest and profit from. And it's just such a toxic dynamic. And I don't want to get caught up in this idea of thinking that dynamic was working for us pre-Elon, because it wasn't, but looking to the future of how can we rebuild this system where there is no person in charge who is reaping all the benefits, but it's just a very different standard of care for the community.
Yeah, and with Divine, I've spent a ton of time now in the last several months talking to creators, and the thing that blew me away was creators no longer see their income from the platforms. YouTube long form, you get some ad revenue, but none of the rest of them. There's trillions of dollars in ad revenue being generated based on the content of people producing stuff, and almost none of it goes to the creators that were doing it. And instead, they have to build other alternate businesses. They've got to set up this link tree and link in bio, and then there's a link and everything else, and then they sell some branded thing and everything else. They're generating content and everything else, but they have to build these side businesses because we've created an economic system where the entire communications medium is captured but it doesn't have to be that way.
I think some people kind of take it to maybe a natural extreme of like, why don't we just all go and have our own websites? And I think that's like, I guess for me, I'm like that's less interesting to me. Yes, you could do that, but there is like a value in being able to like have this kind of collective intelligence, have this kind of communal space, have shared resources, just be in community with other people. And it sucks that it feels like the only recourse is to like completely nope out of that system and just like set up a web page somewhere. But it makes sense. Like another situation that we kind of had some of these conversations reminded me of, we had a very popular, very early Blacksky users. A lot of users who were like early to Blacksky, they ended up being in there's this tool called starter packs that Blue Sky launched. And so we're able to like compile like, here's the accounts that were like popular on Blacksky. And a lot of those folks, like they got tens of thousands of followers through the Blacksky starter pack and the other starter packs that folks had. And so one of those folks, his name's Link, AJ Link. He's a disability activist and community organizer. And, there was again, America is in like this weird political space right now, but there was the Charlie Kirk assassination. And people, I think it's like a common thing on like Black Twitter for like people to kind of make jokes in some of these situations. And for folks that they may have disagreed with, and without passing any kind of morality on that, but just like Blue Sky took like a weirdly aggressive stance in that moment for reasons that were independent of the user. Like they were under a certain level of political scrutiny. They were getting letters from like Republican politicians being like, please make sure that any references to Charlie Kirk on your platforms are respectful. And so in that moment, they did like
despite Charlie Kirk never having been respectful in his entire life.
And they did like a over aggressive moderation, and this user got permanently banned for making a post that was not even, people debate the interpretation of the post, but the post within its own context, it's not the kind of thing that would warrant a permanent ban. But this is a person who built up tens of thousands of followers. They did this thing called Fun Fridays every Friday where they collected all the mutual aid lists. They would like repost any mutual aid posts all day. They got to be known as that for the network. And then their account was just gone. And so tons of people like updated their profile name to like free link, And it even called Blacksky's mission into question at a certain point. And people wrote about that because he was on Blacksky's servers, but he was just not visible from the Blue Sky app. And so that led us to kind of go into like overdrive and really, really deep into the point where we do now run all the infrastructure ourselves. We spent tens of thousands of dollars, tons of hours to like get everything set up so that he can be replatformed, which is a thing that doesn't exist in other places, right?
No one on traditional platforms has any way in which you can re-platform someone unless you sort of exert political will or economic will. We saw a bunch of Trump supporters get re-platformed after Trump won, but like otherwise, we don't have an alternative.
Yeah, and so like, instead of trying to lobby, there are times where like changing your display name and emailing the company is not going to make them change their decision, right? So, but he's one of ours, and so that was enough for us to go out and like set up all that infrastructure to get him back his audience that he had built on Blacksky. And I think that's what you don't get with like the extreme of like, go just set up a website. Yeah, I mean, like, cause
we're social.
Yeah, we're social.
We are social beings. Everyone isn't just off on their own little website. People don't just go off and live in the woods, and like, we are essentially social animals. I mean, I think one of the reasons that these big centralized platforms did end up taking power is we want to connect. We want it to be easy. We want it to be fast and smooth. And it was hard to do that where everybody just built their own software from scratch. And that's why we need this intermediate thing with institutions that support and maintain open source stuff, but also run servers and run moderation teams and do customer support and do documentation and create content and stuff. We need economic institutions to do this, and it doesn't just happen magically.
And I think also another thing I would just say on the community bit is there's this weird trend in like new social media apps where people are making social networks that are just artificial social networks where it's just bots talking to each other. as the like value proposition and as the pitch. And like, I think it's much more interesting to have spaces where people are building real relationships. They're meeting offline. They're forming group chats separately from the app. Yeah, I think there's value in that, and I want to keep seeing that, more of that.
So we're almost at time. Let's just do a quick little wrap up and then we'll ask questions.
Yeah, I guess I would say that for me, the goal, if we're thinking about our social media landscape as feudalism, the goal is to not build a better feudal lord. It's to make that kind of feudalism impossible. And so, kind of like what you said, you said you didn't want to be the HNIC. Fun fact, I tried to get HBIC as a personalized license plate, so I like being the HBIC, but I don't think that we have an internet landscape where there's one person controlling it. I don't think that is the future. So yeah, let's reclaim the internet and make feudalism less possible in the future.
Oh yeah. I think there is lots of pessimism about technology and the internet right now. And so I think people being able to have more control over their online spaces, their identities, their relationships with people, I think that is I want to see more optimistic visions of the future. I want to see more, I want to see less dystopian visions. I want to see more Afrofuturism. I think decentralization there's lots of people talk about like let 1,000 flowers bloom. I think it does open up opportunities for people to be really creative. There's tons of cool projects on App Protocol besides Blacksky. There's a project called Skylight. They got funded by Mark Cuban. They're trying to compete with TikTok. There's a project that just raised $5 million called Tangled, and they're a GitHub alternative. They're trying to bring introduce new forms of social coding. There's a ton of really cool, there's people building like social operating systems. Like I think, I told this at my talk last year at Atmosphere Conference, like I think people should build weird shit and like have fun on the internet again. And so that's kind of my pitch.
Yeah, I think the fun is a thing. Like, I spent many years trying to build good, serious, decentralized software, and then I was like, fuck it, I'm going to put the funny videos up, and people loved it. And I think that we have to show that we're having more fun as the alternative. I know we don't have much time, but we have some questions. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. It was a great discussion. I work for the European Union, and in the EU we have this law called the Digital Services Act, which is what I work on. And at the core of this legislation, there are a lot of the concepts that you guys touched upon when it comes to transparency, accountability, user control. And just to name two, let's say, obligation or measures that we have under this law, we oblige platforms to provide an alternative option of recommender systems that is not based on profiling. And then we oblige platforms to make sure that the parameters of their recommender systems are very clear to users and that users have ways to control this. We also have Eurosky now that was
developed.
I was going to say,
there's Eurosky. Shout out to Sebastian and them.
Yeah. So, my question here, I know that it's very hard to talk about regulation in this country, but the overarching question that I wanted to ask you is, what role do you see for policies to support this type of ecosystems that we are talking about when it comes to decentralized networks and better user control and actually fix some of those incentives that right now are not really aligned, as you were discussing?
Regulation is really important, actually, and it's really, really tricky because the internet and the technology change really quickly. We have this sort of dual aspect of we have a set of regulations like DMA, which is about breaking things open, and mostly it deals with very large platforms and advocating for a bunch of good things. And then we have a whole bunch of age and ID verification stuff that's going to go through, which essentially will make anonymous social media impossible and may make open source and open protocol social media illegal. And so in the name of protecting kids thinking about very large platforms, we may end up passing a set of regulations that make all of these alternatives that we've been trying to build illegal. And so I think it's really important to realize that when regulation happens, that the regulators and the politicians don't just think of Meta and TikTok. And they realize that it's not even a majority of the internet. It's just a really, really public company. And when they make regulation just for them, it can mess everybody else up.
I agree with all that. I think the EU has more sensible regulation than we're seeing. The folks are trying to end Section 230, which is kind of the thing that makes the internet possible and online platforms possible. We see a lot of the age verification stuff.
Like COSA, which is the proposed for the child safety, but it means everybody has to give their ID.
Yeah.
I think seeing more stuff like what they have in the EU here would be nice. But I don't know if there's political momentum.
Oh, no, there isn't. Especially for transatlantic discussions, but okay.
I think the other thing to remember is that the App Store rules and the control that Google and Apple have is the most central control over the internet and all speech that we have today. I mean, there's a reason why Apple says no Karma Sutra, because they're really prudish about stuff. And they get to decide everything that can be on these phones, and that is incompatible with a democratic society.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thanks for Bridget and Rudy for joining me at this wonderful panel at South by Southwest. Look up their work. Rudy's at blacksky.algorithms. Bridget Todd is There Are No Girls on the Internet. Her podcast is amazing. Rudy's work is amazing.
This episode was edited and produced by Eric Johnson from lightningpod.fm. Our executive producer is me, Alice Chan from Flock Marketing.
Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and share this episode if you loved it. Sign up for our email newsletter at revolution.social.
And for more interviews like this one, follow revolution.social on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Nostos, Fountain.fm, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And to paraphrase the Zapatistas, Subcomandante Marcos, we need a social media revolution to make revolution possible. We'll be back next week. See you then.